bank regulation, top of mind on the street right now, but there is a divide, some say, between bankers by their generation. And how much could bank regulation cost? A lot of questions. Andy Serwer, managing editor of Fortune magazine, here joining us to talk about all of it. Andy, fascinating piece in the Times, New York Times, talking about, you have, say, George Soros, John Reed, John Bogle, these sort of Wall Street elders that support the Volcker Plan and regulation, and then you have others like Lloyd Blankfein, Jamie Dimon, who don't so much. Is there a divide on Wall Street by age in terms of regulation?
Well, I think so, and I think it's more than just coincidence, Poppy. I mean, when you talk about this older generation of bankers, they practiced their craft, their trade, before Glass-Steagall was dissolved. And
Exactly.
Glass-Steagall was the law that came out of the Depression that separated banks between investment banking and commercial banking. And over the years, that rule sort of went away piece by piece by piece until, right up into the financial crisis, commercial banks and investment banks essentially the same. They could all be in each other's business. The commercial banks could do all kinds of trading for their own account.
So they made their money, and a lot of it, at a time when we did have much more stringent regulation. But Andy, Wall Street is vastly different now than it was. So can we see that same sort of regulation that they may be supporting? Can we see it in today's day and age when you have Lloyd Blankfein, Jamie Dimon, the heads of these banks at this point in time?
Well, I certainly think we can. And I think there's and I think there's a pretty good argument to be made as to why it would be effective. Because the people who argued for deregulation said the main argument, Poppy, was that if we don't deregulate and let these banks do all manner of services, then what will happen is they'll be eclipsed by banks overseas. In other words, to compete on a global playing field, we have to let our banks do everything. And they would say that, look, we aren't deregulating fast enough. In fact, England is even more deregulated than we are. And there's this country, Iceland, that's even more deregulated. And we need to keep up with the Englands and the Icelands of the world to compete globally.
Yeah, but look what's happened to Iceland, just to name one. Look what's happening to Greece. Look what's happening to a number of nations right now. But on top of that, Andy, then why do you think, and in Davos is a perfect example at the World Economic Forum this year, I heard from banker after banker after banker that they did not support the Volcker Plan, that it would not work, and that it was wrong for global competitiveness. Why are they doing this?
Well, okay. Well, first of all, I'm so glad that you pointed out, of course, that Iceland and the UK got much worse. Well, Iceland blew up and went bankrupt, essentially. The UK in worse shape, their financial system is in worse shape than ours. And I would argue that that has everything to do with the fact that they were more deregulated than even the United States. And in fact, to take it in the other direction, countries that were less deregulated, which is to say more regulated than the United States, like a China, had less problems.
Sure.
Okay, so if you look at that spectrum. Now, why are these bankers today against more regulation? Very simply, because it'll be less profitable for them. And I wouldn't argue. I would agree that they will be less profitable. These institutions will be less profitable if the Volcker rule is put into effect.
They will also be less risky and hopefully not need to be bailed out to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars by taxpayers. I mean, you would think that argument, these are smart men and women at the helms of these institutions.
It's self-interest. It's short-sighted interest on their part to make that argument. And they would say, well, look, you don't regulate Nike and Procter & Gamble this way. Why should we be regulated more than these other institutions and businesses? And the answer is very simple, because you guys have the propensity to destroy our financial system, and that's why we need to take greater care with those businesses.
When it comes to the cost of bank reform, and there are so many ideas out there now, the Volcker Plan, just the latest,
right,
and the cost that banks could incur. Some analysts saying in recent reports it could cost over $200 billion an overhaul of the banking system in terms of reform. Profits would fall by hundreds of billions. From the bankers you're talking to, Andy,
right,
is that their concern? Is that sort of the price tag they're putting on it?
Well, I mean, I've heard these numbers too, Poppy, and I'd have to say that these things, I kind of roll my eyes a little bit. First of all, I'm not exactly sure where these numbers come from. Are they talking about profits they would have made had they not been deregulated or deregulated, excuse me. In other words, is this an opportunity loss, or is this actual more costs of regulating? I mean, it's sort of ludicrous. The bottom line is, if you look at the cost of the financial blow-up, right, and the bailouts, which goes from hundreds of billions to trillions, possibly, that is much more expensive. And that doesn't even take into account the loss that people incur when they lose their jobs, the destruction of families, people losing their homes. I mean, how do you even put a price tag on that? So if we are a little bit, we, the United States, are a little bit behind the curve when it comes to cutting-edge finance, so be it. I think that's something we can live with, and I think that is greatly preferable. Let some other countries experiment and be on the cutting edge. I'm sorry, but we'll end up having to bail them out probably in another 5 or 10 years. But let it be a smaller economy. I mean, and that's just a piece of it. You know, don't even get me started on derivatives and how that's all interconnected. Let's just stay with this piece about deregulation.
Well, Andy, wrapping it up, you said that the heads of these banks right now that aren't supporting reform are short-sighted and essentially selfish.
Yes.
Should they be replaced?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, listen, you know, there's only so much sway that the government holds over these institutions. There's only so much sway the government should hold over these institutions. Obviously, when it comes to Citi right now, they have a lot more control and should, okay? But, you know, Goldman Sachs, other institutions that didn't need the money, didn't want the money, or paid the money back, you know, yes, they're getting aided by low interest rates. I understand all that, but I don't think the government has any power or should have any power to remove CEOs. But I do think that, you know, these guys, maybe while they shouldn't be advocating, I can understand why they're not advocating re-regulation or more regulation. At least they could sort of get out of the way or get involved in the process. I mean, I really think it's important that we do some of this stuff. I mean, do we really want to repeat what we just went through? I think the answer is no.
All right, Andy, we'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Poppy.
Appreciate the insight.